Little cohort right there. I wanted to do a quick show of hands to kind of feel out the room. If you have ever been the only person in a room who represents your race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. If you've ever had that happen, can you raise your hand? Okay. Has that happened 5 times? Can you raise your hand? Has that happened 20 times? And what about every day? Okay, cool. So my objective for this whole talk is to not only reduce the number of hands that went up, but also give you each actionable items that you can take back to your company and implement to kind of, give everyone a voice and a seat at the table. Before we get started, I do want to thank our sponsors. We've got Comcast, Chase for Business, and then the Downtown Denver Partnership. Our track sponsor is Hired. And then Wazzy Digital, my own company, is also a sponsor, and we're a stop on the starter call tonight, so you guys are welcome to stop on. I do want to address kind of sort of an elephant in the room. What is a white guy doing on a diversity panel? Jim is more than our token white guy. He runs one of the more diverse development teams in Denver. So would you like to kick off?
True?
I would argue so. Until someone corrects me, I'm going to say, I'm going to assert that.
Marina is also Latina and Lion, so yeah, I guess. So I'm Jim Ray, Development Director at Captain U. As she said, those are this year, and this is part of my people.
Okay.
I'm Jorge Tellez. I'm Director of Growth and Operations at Turing School, and I'm their token brown guy.
I'm Marla Brazell. I am a software engineer at Democracy Works here in Denver. I am obviously a female.
And I am Brian Johnson, and I'm a software engineer at Captain U, and obviously African American.
Very good. So for me, I didn't really pay attention or care, honestly, about diversity until I had a daughter, and then it just sort of hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was like, oh no, this ends now. So I want to know from you guys, did you have like an aha moment where you realized diversity was an issue?
Do you need to say that?
In tech, in life?
I think, at least like for me, I remember clearly. I think I was like 10 years old, and I was like in Texas, and I'm from Mexico, as you can tell. So I was in Texas because like that's what like people in Montreal like tend to do. Like they travel like there and they go back and they do like all the shopping in Texas and all that. So I was like I had like something like $100 or something, and I was just like buying like toys and so. And I had like spent like I don't know like probably like $60 in this like particular store, and I was like carrying like all these toys. And then I had like this like little like like stuffed animal that I was like carrying here, and I was like putting all the stuff like to pay for it, and then like I paid for everything, but I forgot that I had like this thing here. So then I was like walking outside of the store, and this like after spending like money on it, and then like the alarm started beeping. Then like the manager came to me, and then she started like checking all my stuff, and then she was like, oh like like she passed like this like stuffed animal, and then she was like, oh you didn't pay for it, but the way that she said it was like you're in trouble, So then she was like, where's your mother? And then like they called my mom, and they put me like in this like back room because they thought that I was like stealing it. And I was like, I just like spent like $60 like in this store. Like why would I want to steal like something that is like $5? It doesn't make any sense. Of course, like my mom being like a Mexican lady, she was just like screaming at this like store manager, like how did you dare to do this, whatever, and all this stuff. But that was like when it hit me, that I was not given like even like a chance to explain myself. It was just assumed that I was like trying to steal something. So I don't know, like for me it was like, oh shit, yeah, maybe I'm brown.
For me, I wouldn't say that it was like a moment in time or an aha moment. It was just the fact that, like, since I'm from here and I was raised here, and obviously there's not a lot of African Americans in Colorado, but it was never something that I felt that wasn't issue until I got a little older, like around in like middle school, high school age, where I dressed the part and everything else, and so I would be treated like that to a certain extent, depending on the places that I went and the people that I talked to. And so a lot of people would judge me before they actually talked to me, and so I kind of understood that it was there like around that time. Where it was like, okay, yeah, this is like a thing. It's just something that happens, but not really like
So I want to talk about ageism. It's my perception that your typical Silicon Valley startup is founded by a 22-year-old man who hires 22-year-old white men, who receives funding from a white man who was once 22. I want to know from you guys, why do you think ageism is so endemic in tech? And what are companies missing out on by not hiring applicants with so much more experience?
I think tech is a lot about what's hip and what's cool, and so there's this, it's easy for people to jump to that conclusion that, you know, people who are older don't know what's hip. It's, you know, that image of Steve Buscemi, like, how do you do, fellow kids? You know, it's like, what are you doing here? So I think a lot of companies are afraid to, they'll say that it doesn't fit, it's not a culture fit. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and it was, well, we should stop using the word culture fit because it's really just a band-aid term for people who look and act and think like me, and instead say, you know, what is a cultural ad? And I think hiring people, different ages and all different backgrounds, you get that other perspective because, you know, you're making a product and you think it's cool and hip, but you've got all sorts of people using your product. If you don't have their input, then you've cut somebody out.
I get to talk about that. I have not experienced it directly. Seriously. Maybe because I don't look that often anymore. Maybe if I look now, I would see it, but it's never like directly affected me. I don't think. It could have, I don't know.
Yeah.
When I applied for a job, they might have just asked me like, "Oh yeah, look at this resume. It's 5 pages long." Yeah, not talk to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I miss out on hip language sometimes.
Yeah. Well, so do I.
Nick posted something a minute ago. I was like, I don't even know what that means.
A lot of times when I hear people talking about diversity in tech, it's like, well, if we can only get women and people of color into tech jobs somehow, then it'll be fine. Like, that will be the solution. Is there a silver bullet to diversity in tech? And if not, what do you guys think is the first step in the right direction?
I don't know if there's a silver bullet, but I was at another session yesterday, and somebody mentioned that, you know, their thoughts were, if only women were more confident, then they would advance throughout the technical ranks. If only they didn't drop out of science and math courses in high school when they got hard, that, you know, they would be successful. And I found myself like very upset with this because I consider myself a confident woman in tech, and if I had $1 for every time I was called a bitch or called aggressive, I wouldn't need my tech job. I would be fine. So it's, you know, there's some element of truth to that, but it's also incumbent upon the people who are seeing people in this light to do something about it. So, you know, as a white woman, it's upon me to say something if I see something happening to somebody of a different race that's not right. It's not up to them to explain why this thing is screwed up. It's up to me. It's up to men to say something when women are getting spoken over in meetings and having their ideas appropriated. I think this is everybody's problem, and just if you are in that group where you are so fortunate as to not be experiencing it firsthand, then you have double that obligation to speak up for the other people who are not as lucky as you.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing that you mentioned right there, like the kind of like the who is responsible for making like the other like comfortable and accepted. I think that's crucial, you know, like because you were saying like tends to be like that. A lot of people are expecting, that the diverse member or the diverse employee or something to be like acting in a certain way to fit in the mold, and it's more like anything should be reversed. Like what can we do like to make them like feel more comfortable, and for example, like during like we are like very aware of like our biases, and one of the things that I keep hearing is especially from Hispanic students, prospective students, is like, I'm applying here because I see that you're in the leadership place, and I never like thought of it, that was like kind of like a very important thing, but apparently it is, and sometimes just like having like the right faces in the right places actually like makes like a lot of difference.
Yeah. It's actually funny you say that because I went on Techstars, the mentor page, just yesterday, I think, and I actually counted, it was 50 white male faces before I got to the first woman. And I was just like, are you kidding me? They're on the page, but it's just, scroll.
Well, I think I've been in the industry for 25-ish years, let's say. And probably before Captain U, I could probably say I worked with maybe 6 women developers. I don't know why that is. I wasn't in a position to hire at that time, but that was the state of things. I don't know why. I don't think there's a silver bullet though. I think you can have people that you can't technically say you want to hire a woman. You can't technically say you want to hire an African American. So you kind of have to work around the system there. I mean, I might not want to hire a white male, but I can't say that.
Yeah.
And I think it makes it a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So one thing my current company has tried, and I was the first one, is, so I'm in a technical position, so you can screen somebody like me for hard skills and hire based on that. So I did a code challenge and submitted it to the person that requested it, and they stripped all identifying information out of that. So they stripped my name, my email, my instructions were, when you write your code, don't self-identify. And that person passed it along. They know whose it was, so they were not part of that process. So, when you bring someone in for a later round of interview, like, you've got to talk to them. You've got to figure out who they are. But if you're screening, there's really no excuse, I think, these days, especially for technical positions, to say, well, we looked and looked and looked, and we just didn't find anybody. There wasn't anyone out there. Because you can do things like this to try to at least remove bias from that first step.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't feel like there's a silver bullet, and I don't feel like it should ever be that you try to hire someone of a woman or a person of color just because of that. I feel like they still need to be able to do the job. They still need to be able to have the skills to do what they need to do. But just to try to increase the recruiting, the places that you recruit, and the funnels that you go in to recruit. So I feel like that's more important than the aspect of focusing on well, I need to hire so-and-so females and so-and-so, that. It's just the fact of let's broaden our aspect of where we get our recruits, and we'll get a more diverse team.
I think that's like a key point that you're making there, because we were at this panel where there were discussions about how to implement tech hire here, and I didn't go about this, but when I was at this meeting, I was making the point that we not only need to focus on people who hadn't had access to college, but more on also on diversity as well, and then the response to this thing was from some of the boot camps was we don't want to lower our standards, and I was like, why do you think you should need to lower your standards? We don't lower our standards. We just look into places that other people haven't looked into, and our standards are the same. Our metrics are exactly the same, are as rigorous with everyone, but we just kind of talk to more people, and actually if you see our outcomes report, we have graduated 186 students, and actually people from color tend to outperform normal students. So when someone tells me that, I'm just okay, look at the data, and then tell me that again. You can try, but I will punch you.
don't want to hire someone to then have to hire somebody again shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder if some of it is in the background too. But when I graduated high school, I went into the Navy, and I was surrounded by people of every color, gender, everything. You know, and I personally find to work with a bunch of white guys to be extremely boring because we are all the same. I want that diverse background. I want to be exposed to other cultures. I love that aspect of the Navy, and then when you get out and you go program, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is not what it was like. And it was sort of disappointing, at least to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, we just have to I'm not going to say like some people that I don't see color, but I will tell you that I do not judge people on color.
I think that's the best approach. You know? In your experience, is it getting better?
I think so. I think the boot camps have had a drastic change in like our diversity.
Yeah.
I think the boot camps offer people like radically life-changing skills and opportunities.
No, I definitely agree with that. Like, I came to tech from a boot camp and a grade school, turns out boot camp. So, yeah, I would have never gone to college and been like, yeah, I'm going to be a computer scientist. That makes sense. No, it just would not have happened. So, I think that's important. So, I've been to a lot of the diversity talks this week, and they've mostly centered around women in tech. And I want to share two horrifying statistics with you. African American and Latino men make up 9% of computing jobs, and African American and Latino women 4%. That's together, two huge populations together, 4%. Do you think it's easier to talk about women in tech than it is to start addressing issues of race?
I think that's a societal thing, isn't it? Isn't it just
Yeah.
easier society-wise to do that? It doesn't make it right, but that's kind of the fact right now, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like the tensions with everything that's going on in society with racial issues doesn't help the issue, but it is a lot easier. Well, not a lot. I don't want to say that, but it seems like that having the output of male versus female seems to be a little more comfortable than to actually get into a racial aspect, just because all races have men and women, as opposed to you have whites and blacks and Hispanics and everything like that. So it's easier to bring that up because it's not necessarily as getting into certain other issues, but I feel like the key is that just to know that it is apparent and that it is something is like the first key. It's all check.
Yeah, and I think like also like there are like many as you were saying like there are like many like vectors on the diversity thing. Like one is like gender, the other is ethnicity, the other one is like sexual identification and preference, and like all these kind of like vectors make like the issue like very very complex. So if you only have like kind of like one binary thing, I think it makes like the makes like the debate like a little bit easier. However, like I think like we need to talk about like all those tangents or whatever or vectors, let's say, to actually have like a fruitful conversation. I mean, there's like a huge problem certainly with gender, but there's like a huge problem with ethnicity as well, and with also like with gender identification and sexual orientation. I mean, like what's happening in North Carolina, with like people like forcing to take on other restrooms, or what's happening with the NFL and Colin Kaepernick, doing like this amazing like stand, and so I feel like there's like many things, many discussions, ongoing discussions, and we need kind of to embrace them all. That was my take.
I think the offenses against women in tech are more newsworthy by the media standards. Like, you go to big TechCrunch party and there are, women not wearing clothing, walking around with, doing bottle service for men. And that makes a captivating headline. But that doesn't mean that the offenses against other groups are not there. They're just not as interesting, so to speak, and that's a terrible way to put it, but they don't get as much attention. So I think that, coupled with Ryan's point about, racial tension being really at a high right now, people are afraid to step in and say something for fear of offending. And so I think some people, and I'm definitely guilty of this too, you exclude yourself from a conversation thinking, you know, if I'm silent, nobody is going to think I'm an idiot, versus, you know, if I open my mouth, then they'll all know. Instead of saying, like, you know, hey, I don't know how to talk about this, but can we have a conversation? Like, I want to try.
I think that's very important. It's the fact that, and I think it comes from both. I think it comes from people of color or women in itself being more accepting into the fact of having the conversation and not feeling like if somebody asks a question and wholeheartedly wants to know the answer, that you don't necessarily take it as being disrespectful, but only as being inquisitive and trying to learn more about it. So I feel like, you know, as a person of color, if somebody wants to ask me about something that is going on with my culture or how I feel about something, I should have that door open so that we can have a discussion without necessarily having it be me seen as it being disrespectful or something like that. Because I feel like ignorance is only going to hurt the issue, and it's not going to help us get past that.
Well, you and I have had this conversation.
Right.
Because I readily admit, I'm an ignoramus. Let me tell you that kind of stuff. I'm not going to deny it. I mean, but I have Ryan, he's a buddy of mine. We work together. I ask him questions because I don't understand, like, when something in the news, that an African American male gets shot by a police officer for an unidentified reason, it makes me worry for Ryan and his family because I care about them. I don't know, and I have to ask him, hey, do you worry about this? Because I don't want my person that I like to worry about those kind of things. I just don't know how to address it sometimes.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that, but I would rather be uncomfortable and have an open conversation than, you know, just pretend that it's like, oh, I can't do anything, well, I should be quiet. You know?
I think people are uncomfortable with being confronted with the realities of their own privilege, and it causes them to do some otherwise unsavory things in what could be an otherwise productive situation.
And I think like one of the key things there is I'm really glad that you're like kind of like opting into that kind of conversations, because I mean, like for people like us, like we don't have really like an opportunity to kind of like opt out. You just like need to have these conversations. I mean, like I didn't choose to be like stopped at this like a store because like, they thought that I was like stealing, or when they stopped me like random like at airports because besides like looking like Mexican, they have like Arab heritage, so it's like double danger. So you know, so when you don't really get like to choose like to be part of those conversations, I will like sometimes I will be like happy not to have them and just be like I just kind of like need to watch like Netflix and chill. But again, like really like it's really encouraging when other people that don't need to have these conversations opt in and become like allies. I think that's like super important to further like this debate, you know.
I mean, that's an interesting point. Like, I have the option to opt out of a lot. Like, I'm a woman, but I'm a white woman raised in the South, so I am very privileged by any definition, and I've got the option to opt out of that conversation, whereas, you know, Ryan does not have the option to opt out of certain conversations, or Jorge, or, you know, whatever minority group you identify. So I think for those of us who do have that option to opt out, we need to make extra effort to be opting in.
An article just came out about Obama's female staffers working together to amplify each other's ideas. And I feel like anyone can do this for anyone in the room. And it's basically like, particularly when a woman, by the way, like Susan Rice was one of those women, so blows my mind. But if someone suggested something, then you just repeat it, give credit to the original speaker, and that allows it to amplify to the point where other people begin to hear that type of thing.
Yeah, I wanted to point that out too.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a woman to do that.
No.
Please, if you're a guy in a room with a woman or an African American or whoever, speak up, echo their point.
Yeah.
Because it does happen and it's not intentional, I don't think.
No, not at all. So I frequently hear that the reason for the gender pay gap is women just don't ask for raises. And in my experience, women receive a much less favorable response when negotiating for salary than their male peers, even when they're sitting on other offers or more experience.
director, you don't even consider the gender aspect. I mean, in all of our juniors, we pay them all the same. Gender race is not an issue. They will all get probably the same raise. Gender race is not an issue. So I think you just take that out of the equation. Now, there's probably the point where you get to where, like, you're my age, right? That when you're negotiating to get a job, it might be different. But I mean, I wouldn't think if we were hiring another senior developer, I would like to think that gender or race would not figure into it.
I think it's a good starting point, but then I think there's the question of implicit bias. So I'm not a hiring manager, but I've negotiated in a number of jobs with mixed results. But I would say if you are in the position where, let's say you have a female direct report, say, you know, I've done this, that, and the other, and beyond my, you know, call of duty, and, you know, want to talk about adjusting my compensation. And if your first thought is something like, no, because you're aggressive in a meeting, or people don't like you, or, you know, these sort of intangibles having to do with their character, and then you stop and say, you know, why do I feel this way? Is this really relevant? If it's, you know, well, you come in late or whatever, it's like, well, is she taking a kid to school? Is she still getting her work done? Does it really matter if she's in at 9:30 versus 8:30 if she's doing a good job? Like, ask yourself those questions, because I think we don't think about them, but we tend to attribute those qualities to women and then deny them opportunities for advancement when we don't hold men necessarily to the same set of standards.
Yeah, so I have, I think, like 7 like people on my team. All of them are women, and which is kind of like, sometimes I think like we might need to hire like a white dude to like a like diverse like team there. So we like kind of like err on the other end of the spectrum. And I kind of like I'm very mindful of like having like those conversations with them and recurrently, so that I am aware of like what are their needs. You know, like what are like how can I make like work like better for them? What are like the things that are preventing them from, you know, like I don't know, like that things that are like that bother them, or I always like tell them like if there's anything that makes you like uncomfortable that I say or someone else say, like tell me. And I have done it sometimes, and you know, like I think like that having like that kind of like trust, like it's really helpful. But sometimes I even like I kind of like push them as well, like to grow. And I don't know whether like that's like good or bad, but I just do, because like I sometimes like feel that they might be like a little bit hesitant in asking for training or asking for raises or asking for title changes. And I'm like, okay, like now you were hired for this, now you're doing this, like, you know, like how can we make this better for you, you know, like so that the value that that you're bringing in is actually like representative of the money that you're getting. So I'm, as a hiring manager, I'm trying to like have those conversations. Now, I think on the other end of the spectrum, I think like always approaching those conversations in a very like kind of like unemotional like tone is always like helpful, and stating like the facts. So just saying, you know, like, hey, by the way, I've been here like for 2 years. I think like my position has been this, it's running to this. I want this position to be like this, and for this thing, I think like my new title needs to be like this. And you know, I was thinking if like the salary can reflect that like change responsibilities. And if you like phrase it that way, no one is gonna be like, oh, like, you know, they're like asking me for more money, or hey, like they're being like very aggressive. It's more like you're making like a case for why you are adding more value to the organization. And if they don't care, then just like find another job, really. I mean, like, that's pretty much the bottom line, I think.
Well, I also think women are taught, you know, men, I think in a lot of cases men get raises because they ask for them. And it may just be as simple as that. With a manager that's like, yeah, if you make a case, I'll give you a raise, and I'm ignoring these biases and I'm doing everything right. But women are taught to be well-liked and not rock the boat and agreeable, and so asking for a raise is scary. And so I wouldn't just assume that if you've got female employees and they're not approaching you with conversations about compensation, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are content with where they are. And so as a manager, it's up to you to start that conversation sometimes because there are deep cultural reasons why it might not otherwise be happening.
Yeah, and just like a little trick on that, like I always like find when I'm not trying to negotiate a position, I try to remove myself from the equation. So it's like, okay, if I were like telling like a friend like how to like ask for a raise, and the friend had like this and this and this like situation, like how would I go like about it? You know, like how would I like recommend that person to write an email? So like by removing your kind of like your persona from that particular conversation, then if that conversation doesn't go well, like at least it's not like you don't feel that your ego is like bruised or anything. You can just like kind of like move on and do something else, you know. So and that goes back, like I think what you said like on kind of like how you know like women are raised to be like agreeable and all that stuff. Like that's something that we've seen in our students, and you know like we always like it's funny because we tend to see that our female students like they think that they're performing worse when they're actually like performing, and with the men students they think that they're performing better and when they're actually like performing, and I think it has to do with that kind of like hubris that comes to it, you know. So yeah, I think like that's like really worth like bearing in mind.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about it, and I feel like job applications, when a man looks at job requirements, it's like 20% I'm applying. Whereas a woman's like, oh, I don't want to do that one thing, maybe not. I want to give you all a chance to ask some questions, but before I move on, what's one question that you all wish I would have asked?
What is the best Mexican restaurant? Chipotle, right?
Taco de Mex, that's the best restaurant.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I mean, I wanted to just say that I want to make sure that this doesn't seem like a white male bashing type of issue. I just feel like, and getting back to the focus on why this is important is the fact that we make better products, right? So if we have a more diverse team, we make better products for everybody, and it's good for everybody. It's not necessarily saying that it's going to be 50-50 for everything, but at the same time, if we can improve in that way and we can know that it is there, then it's a better situation for everybody. And so I just wanted to state that.
I would echo that. I mean, my manager is a white guy, Wes, if you're watching. And he is probably the biggest feminist I've ever met. Which I say that is a high compliment of the highest order, where you know he's challenging his own assumptions and he's challenging privilege, and everybody here, whether you're like a white guy or whoever, can do that. So if that's the takeaway that people walk away with, of just you know what are my biases and how can I listen to somebody else. But I would say, you know, if you have somebody in your life that comes up and says, you know, I feel this way, just accept what they're saying as truth. Don't question it. Don't try to explain it away. Seek to listen. Don't make them feel that they have to defend their position in order to hold the stage with you. I think that would be a great first step to improving a lot of the issues that we see both at work and outside of it.
Yeah, there's a thing about candor, a book that's coming out soon about radical candor, that you don't ask for the specifics of why someone feels that way, you just assume that they feel that way. That's how they feel, regardless of knowing the specifics. Because a lot of people won't remember the specifics of why you feel like someone's acting sexist. They just feel you're acting that way.
Yeah, and just like to add on that point, like you know, perception is reality at the same time. So I think we have to kind of like approach you know like every conversation like from a position of kind of like I don't know like I don't know if this is even a thing like enlightenment like ignorance. You know like try to like research as much as you can, and also like try to empathize with like someone, and then hear their arguments and put yourself in their shoes, and just like try to like see how did they get to that like particular like perception, and just like acknowledge that perception is like is real for them, you know, like that person who is experiencing that thing, there's been this thing and it's real, it's very, very real for them, and the opposite point can be like real for you as well. So it's not really like about, you know, kind of like changing or forcing other views into some other people. It's just like understanding them, you know, and embracing them, I think.
I I would like to know why you guys think, well, white guys don't participate in diversity.
Well, I can share my opinion. I think it's incredibly uncomfortable. Like, if I'm thinking, I'm gonna put on my white man persona here. I think it's uncomfortable. I feel like, well, what am I supposed to do about this? I think Marla said something about, you know, being honest about your privilege and what advantages you have just off the cuff, for free. And so that's a difficult thing to think about, you know? It's like, when I think about myself, I didn't grow up wealthy or anything, but I got a really good education. Well, that puts me at an advantage, period. And there's lots of things about that.
Do you think some people in the women in tech field might be a little off-putting sometimes?
How do you mean by off-putting?
There's, I can put this in a way that doesn't get me in trouble.
It's not off-putting.
There are some that are more, I would say, if a guy was this way, I'd call him obnoxious about it, that tend to like slam men, and it really is off-putting to me. And I'm a supporter of women in tech and diversity in tech, and it's off-putting to me when I see that. Like Twitter slams for a guy. It's like, why would you do that? You don't need to like slam someone in public and ruin their career or their life. I mean, they might have a family for all you know. And it's very disappointing to me because if I did that, I would be embarrassed for myself.
I think it depends on how like they approach the conversations. For example, like if I think like if someone comes like from like a position of understanding and kind of like an empathy, and they just like don't know and they kind of like mess up or something, but they're really trying to do the right thing. I think that intentionality like actually like makes like a lot of difference. And if someone is just like, you know, like they are like actively feeling like an asshole, then I mean like that's like a different like reaction that we need to have. But I think ultimately like I agree with you that if someone like tries to come from like a position of empathy, we as minorities, we have kind of like a responsibility to kind of like embrace that person and then like try to explain our point and try to like you know, communicate like our thought process in a very respectful way. You know, respect goes like both ways. What I don't like is like someone that comes like to these conversations from a position of like, I'm gonna tell you why you all like suck. You know, like it's like, yeah, I don't want to hear that. Or if with someone that comes from that like perspective, and then you are like, no, you don't even have like a right to think about this because you are like a cis male. Like, well, like, no, like that's not the case. You know, like it's kind of like let's kind of like talk and let's have this conversation to actually like start like understanding one another. You know, I think.
I mean, people are rude, and that slices across the entire planet, no matter who you are. And so, you know, yes, people act inappropriately on the internet. It is a problem these days. But like, I think not just to play devil's advocate, because it's not great to be put on blast. But as a woman, I experience subtle sexism every single day of my life. You know, people of color experience racism every single day of their lives. Part of being privileged means to be able to tune that out, or to not even be aware, of that is a privilege of the highest order. So when people have visceral reactions, you know, if they act rudely, that's a different issue, but even just to consider why somebody might be compelled to act that way, it might be a reaction to 30 years of experiencing the same jab over and over, and you come in and are very well intentioned and don't necessarily mean it, but you know, who knows, maybe they were just having a shitty day, and you know, after 30 years of this, they snap, and maybe it's not in the most appropriate fashion, but there's reason behind it.
I was going to say, I think a lot of people reach their breaking point. I'd also say that I think sometimes it starts to feel like there's lots of trolling on the internet when you try and bring up like a serious subject, and people sort of make fun of it, or there's this subtle, you know, it really feels like they're not listening or taking it seriously. Then it's like, well, I'm just going to kick it up a notch and be that much more intense.
it interesting in terms of trying to figure out how the challenges you have in technology. So being 20-some years into this, I kind of learned that technologists have a lot of ownership of what they do. So you're trying to build a team that's cohesive, a team that works well together, and interjects diversity in that team, while you're dealing with, you know, some unique characters in general. I mean, I'm in IT, I've had unique characters that work with many here. So there's the challenge of kind of embracing them and bringing the best out of them. There's also the challenge of getting them to work together well, and getting, again, they own what they do, right? We're producing things that other people are consuming. So I find it really interesting in whether or not diversity can be easier there than it can be in other areas like sales and marketing and places where you're the consumer, not the creator. Did you guys feel that that's the case? You feel that, I mean, theoretically it should to some extent be almost easier in technology because of the fact that we're used to these characters, these guys, these thinkers and all that, versus other people are consuming. So they just, you know, they just need to absorb it. So being accepting in that place is really
I think it comes back down to people are going to be used to what they're exposed to, and so ignorance really, like if you've never been involved with somebody that is of color, or obviously men and women is kind of it's a little different because everybody's going with women. But if you've been in that instance where you haven't had a lot of your friends aren't people of color or things like that, and you go based off of your assumptions. You go based off of what you know and what you've heard. And I feel like that can be the main driver. And if we can kind of try to avoid that issue and try to focus on people as opposed to kind of what you're bringing into the equation from what you've experienced, then I feel like you'll start to see that a lot of people are just people. And I mean, I know that's cliche and everybody says that, but I feel like it really is true. There's going to be good people, there's going to be bad people in all races, all genders. But to try to avoid that and to try to just put that barrier down will help benefit everybody.
I think it makes economic sense to hire, with, like Brian said, for an eye for people. I had a company I worked at several years ago. I was in a meeting with another engineer, and we were having a disagreement over a process, over something really mundane. And I remember at one point we were sitting in a small conference room with the door closed around a small table, and at one point he stood up and he put his hands on the table and he leaned over. And I don't think he was aware of what he was doing, but he was standing over me, and it was terrifying. And so I said something, and the response that I got was, well, yes, so-and-so is an asshole, but he's also the only person that knows this part of the stack, so unfortunately I can't do anything about it. And that was a very clear instance of, you know, in tech we tend to value the rock star, ninja, 10x, developer, cliche, you know, whatever, and don't care if they are a total shithead, as long as they can produce code. And so I think, you know, while you're getting code out the door faster, you've got this other cost in terms of word gets around. People talk in this community. Denver is small. We all know each other. So you've got to decide where you want to spend your money. Do you want to spend it on hiring good people from backgrounds and taking the time to get them up to speed, or do you want to spend it on engineer turnover while you've got a couple of people that are pounding out code?
Here's the thing though, like fast doesn't mean like better though. Like I think like, you know, some of the conversations that can happen like from having like that kind of like communication and discussion and conflict, like actually those are kind of like better. Like I think like it turns into like a better product, into better systems, into better things. I was just like listening to this podcast like 99% Invisible, and they like said this a really like cool story about like how the Air Force at some point they were having like this like awful like performance in the Air Force, and a lot of people like pilots were like dying. And this like Harvard like grad like did like this research on what was happening, and then they just figured out that all the measurements that they had like taken on people were like from 1920s, and then the cockpit like was like designed for those like people, and they didn't like adapt. I bet that there was like some other like more like diverse people or more like diverse thinking in that like group of people that were like making that decision. Someone would have been like, do you think that this is really like a good idea? You know, like maybe we should like make like this like I don't know, like seat like slide or like pedals come up or something, like so that you know we might not die. So I think like those cases are like really interesting, and we see this like in tech all the time. You know, we see like Snapchat releasing like a filter that like I don't know how to say, like Asianize your face, and if we're like some other people like in that team, probably they will be like, yeah, maybe this is not a good idea, you know. So I feel like there's kind of like different perspectives and different way of thinking can actually like make your product and your team and stronger, you know, like in the long run.
I can take 2 more questions. There's one over here. Okay, so good.
So you and I could talk a little bit about my friend's film Code, which is about the gender bias in software. The next film is working title Bias, and it's all about unconscious bias. And Marley talked about implicit bias and stuff. I think that feels like the next battleground, I think, for a lot of folks, because you can do the obvious stuff like widen the funnel, you know, people pay for your work, promotions, well-described jobs. It's the stuff that we're doing we don't maybe we know we're doing, that we'd like to attack for a lot of leaders, I think, particularly who are white guys. So I think I'd love to have this panel address a little bit of some of the examples of things you see or experience that are in that unconscious bias category.
I think what I do is I have people just tell me. I would much rather people just get on my ass about it so I can change. I mean, I'm approaching 50. Life was a lot different when I was younger than it is now. So sometimes things take me a little more time.
I think something I would feel encouraged by is a manager, you know, to the extent that you feel comfortable, but if my manager were to get up and say, hey, here's a mistake I made and I was wrong and I learned something, and see them put themselves in that position of like, you know, I'm learning things, that, you know, and follow that up with, if I do something like that or someone else does that on the team, like constructively approach them and explain, you know, you open up that culture to learn about that, because, you know, you don't know what it is until someone calls you out. And so it's incumbent on you to make people feel okay. So seeing an example of something like that, because I mean, it's everywhere, you know, go to a software conference, you're like, oh, are you on the marketing team? And I'm like, oh God, you don't want me to do your marketing? Like, I write code, why else would I be at a software conference? You know, it happens everywhere. And so you've got to make yourself open to being called out for that kind of thing.
And to acknowledge that like bias just exists. You know, I have prejudices that I'm constantly overcoming, and I had a difficult conversation with a friend just a week ago, and it's just, you have to confront these things in yourself and be open to that.
I think it goes back to the point of if somebody says like, hey, I had this experience, to be like, well, are you sure that he didn't really mean that? Like, just say, you know, that sucks that you feel like this, and not ask that person to justify why they feel bad about something that happened to them.
Yeah, and I feel like it's coming like from like, you know, we kind of like we're in this position of like, you know, all difference is bad today, like there's no difference whatsoever. You know, like let's all be like colorblind, and now I think like what we're seeing like now, what I'm really like excited is like people like actually like embracing those differences and be like, no, like you know, like I actually like you come from a different culture than I am, you know, you have like a different way of like looking at these things. There's like certainly like different ways that we approach problems, and let's just like celebrate those like differences, and let's build like together something like that is like really cool. And that's what I like. That's what I think like it feels like more natural to me. You know, like every time that I try like just to put like a color blindness bit, like it's just like it's so exhausting. You know, so I rather like celebrate and embrace those differences than just like pretend that the reality doesn't exist. You know.
Yes. So one of the biggest excuses you hear about not hiring women in tech, and I don't know if this is the same for like people of other ethnicities and everything, but is that basically they don't have as much experience as a lot of the male candidates. They can't find senior female developers, things like that. And now there's so many code schools and boot camps and all these exciting kind of alternatives to traditional education. Do you think that part of embracing diversity is embracing juniors and embracing education?
I'll answer that. Yes. Sorry. Very much so. I mean, if we looked at the number of CS graduates that are women or African American or whatever, you're probably gonna see a very low number. I don't even know what it is.
It's low. I think it's like 17.
But if you look at like, especially touring, it's probably, what, 30%?
Yeah.
That's a big number. So I think, yeah, I mean, don't pass someone over because they're from a boot camp. I mean, Marla and I were on the junior panel, and so was Jorge the other day. So I think that's just as important. I mean, and I think it's up to people like me who've been around a while to hire those people and bring them up so they become the leaders of the future and will change. Like, I mean, I met Kathy Keating, is there the other day? I had never met her before. She's a director at AutoPay. And in my world, I had never met a VP that was a female, really, of development that I can remember. So I think it's very interesting, and we can train more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I feel like just me personally, there's no right answer really. When I was in college, I didn't really, I mean, like a lot of other people, I didn't really focus on the academic portion of it. I was a student athlete, and so I thought that as long as I got a degree, I'd get a job, I'd be good to go. So not necessarily realizing the impact that those years would have moving forward. Not saying that I had like a 3.0 and things like that, but it still wasn't able to get me involved in the different opportunities that are apparent now. And so with a lot of people like me that are changing, changing careers and things of that nature, the boot camps, the coding schools, really the good ones, will get people ready for the job. And I feel like that's what's important. That's one of the reasons why I was in tech, is because it's not really about, to most people, it's not really about where you came from. It's not really about the school that you went to. It's not any of that stuff. It's about what you can do, what you can produce. And I feel like that in itself just really resonates with me, because you can always, if you have, the will, and if you have the work ethic to do it, then you should be able to do it. So I feel like that is extremely important to be able to take people that have graduated from coding schools and put them into your team.
And I think implicit biases start young. Girls play with dolls and boys play on the computer. That's something, even boy toys are, build this thing, and girl toys are like make your own nail polish, and like that's fun, but